Welcome back to uh, History and Politics Chat at 4 o'clock on Tuesdays. My name is Heather Cox Richardson. I'm a professor of history, but I do not speak for my employer when I do these videos. And I will also, just as a quick aside here, before I talk about the day's political news, mention that I say that because um, I like keeping a real wall between what I do in my free time and what I do in the classroom. Um, Not least because I recognize that in a classroom I'm in a position of power, and that I don't want students to think like I do. I want them to learn how to think, but then I want them to think for themselves. But I'm riffing on that a little bit because a dear friend of mine has gotten into some trouble this week because she tweeted something about Mike Pence. It was not terribly offensive, I didn't think, but there's a group of people called Campus Reform that are trying to shut down basically free speech of anybody except I won't even call them conservatives, because I'm sort of a Lincoln conservative. I believe in the values embodied in our Constitution and in our Bill of Rights, which is not really what today's conservatives talk about. In any case, I just want to make it really clear that um, uh, that it's really okay for people to who are in the academy to talk outside the academy in political ways, in ways about their sexuality. And we don't stop being people just because we are employed by institutions. But when I say that, I know now there's three people. I was also on the first professor watch list. All three of us that I know personally who've gotten into trouble with people on with Campus Reform and with Turning Points USA and with Tucker Carlson. All three of us are prize-winning teachers who really are into the idea of developing the student and not putting any kind of political pressure on our students. And most of us, actually all three of us, work with students all over the spectrum and are actually really open to that and are honored by the students for that. So when you see this idea that somehow there are these crazy academics out there who are poisoning children, that's really a trope on the right. And I'm not going to go into that more now. It's a great story. I could tell you more about it, but I'm kind of feeling, when I say that disclaimer, it sounds like I'm going to say something incredibly crazy and radical. I'm not. Obviously, you've heard me talk before, but I say that because, especially for my students, I don't, when I put out, I don't talk about my own personal opinions at all in a classroom. And there's a little bit more of influence in the stuff I do here than I would ever do in a classroom. So that's why I say that. All right. So you guys had a bunch of questions this week, and I'm going to get to them to the degree I can. As you know, things are very busy right now for a lot of people. As you I think did not post at 5 o'clock this morning. So I'm going to do the best I can, and we'll see what I can get to. So I was actually a little bit surprised. One of the things that most of you wanted to know something about was this new Hunter Biden laptop story. And I'd like to get into that because it involves two major stories itself. And I sort of feel like this is really in the weeds, but it's important to know. So let's start right here with the laptop story. And this is one of the things I keep emphasizing about looking for sources, looking for who is telling you this information. So the story, as nearly as I can piece it together, came out last Wednesday, less than a week ago, in the New York Post. And the New York Post is a tabloid. And a tabloid has much lower standards of vetting sources than what I am going to use the word real, a real newspaper would do. So the story, and I'm going to unpack that in a little bit, but the story as it appeared was something like this. And the story has changed a lot. So I'm going to have a hard time putting it exactly how it was. So if I get something wrong, I'm sorry about that ahead of time. So the story, as I understand it, is that initially was that somebody came into a repair shop in New York with 3 laptops that needed repair. And the person who owned the repair shop is legally blind. And he did not, at the time, seem to note that the customer coming in was, he later believed, was Hunter Biden. he assumed that from a sticker on one of the laptops that referenced Beau Biden. And the Bidens are the children of Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden, who had uh, uh, two sons and a daughter by his first wife, and his first wife and his daughter were both killed in a car accident when the baby was very young, and when the boys were very young, and obviously the Bidens were very young, they died, and the two boys were injured in that car crash. There were two of them. There was Beau and there was Hunter, and Beau later on went on to become somebody who looked like he was going to follow in his father's footsteps. He was active politically. It seemed like he was going in such a direction that he would sort of be the next generation of Bidens. But he died of cancer after he served a term in Iraq. He was a lawyer who went over there, and he died of cancer. So Hunter Biden is Joe Biden's second son, and I want to emphasize here, he was never aimed for a political career. He has never gone that direction, and he seems to be quite a private person. If you Google how much Hunter Biden has been out there in front of everybody, he's just not. He seems like he wants to be a private person. I certainly, I read a lot, and you see a lot about many characters in political life. You just don't see much at all. I mean, nothing that I can even think of about Hunter Biden. Then, after the death of his first wife in the car accident, Joe Biden remarried Jill Biden, and they have a daughter as well. So Biden, the Democratic nominee for president, currently has two living children, and that's going to matter in just a minute. And I'm not going to tell you anything more about the daughter, and I'm embarrassed to say I don't remember the daughter's name. Somebody will probably put it in the commentary there. All right, so that's who Hunter Biden is. So this guy is in the repair shop, and he gets these three laptops, and he thinks because there is, he says, a Beau Biden sticker on one, that these were provided by Hunter Biden. And according to this story, and I'm not quite sure about the order of it here, the FBI subpoenaed one of the laptops, but before the guy handed it over, he made a copy of what was on it, and somehow he gave it to Rudy Giuliani. And I'm sorry, I obviously there's a problem here with the story. And Hunter Biden, or this person who had left these laptops, never came back for them. So that's the story. Well, come on. How often do you take three laptops into a repair shop with incriminating evidence on them? That's the piece I forgot to say. There was incriminating evidence on these, allegedly. With incriminating evidence on them, and then you don't pick them back up? And then, wait a minute, how did Rudy Giuliani get involved in this? I mean, there's so many holes in this story. And then the holes got bigger and bigger as people tried to chase it down, and they figured out who the repair shop guy was and interviewed him, and he was crazy all over the map. And there's one hole after another in this story. So first of all, the story itself does not pass muster. And it appears in this tabloid. So then we have the issue of the fact that Rudy Giuliani then tried to defend why he had taken his information to the New York Post. And he said straight up that he thought that it was the only place that would produce this information without trying to verify the sources. Okay, so that's a problem. Like one of the things, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about sources, but one of the things that you want when somebody tells you something is to be able to verify the source. Do you trust the source from where it is coming? Well, if your sister is a brilliant cook and she says to you, look, you really got to put the apple pie in a ceramic plate on the bottom of the oven because it'll cook better, you have a sense that, I can trust that. But are you going to just go take the advice on baking from any two randos on the street? No, you want to know who they are. You want to know what their sources are. And the same thing is true here. Like, why should we believe any of this? I'm not saying it's not true yet. I'm saying, why should we believe this? So then, of course, once this thing came out, every major newspaper jumped on it because they wanted the story too. And all of them came back. And the ones that people mention are the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. All three from different spaces on the political spectrum saying, we're not touching this story. We don't think it's true. We got no sources for it. And then news broke, I think it was yesterday, although my days were a little mixed up here, that the Fox News channel passed on the story because they thought it was too iffy to publish as well. So now we have a story where the story's out there, and you've got people who literally have paid reporters to track down their sources and to find out whether or not something is true, saying, we got nothing. We can't help this. We can't prove that it's true. So we're not going to run with it. All right. So now you get from the Trump loyalists a real pushback saying this is a scandal. Why is nobody covering this? This is a terrible scandal, on and on and on. And there is pressure being put by the Trump administration on Christopher Wray, who is the director of the FBI, to go ahead and, announce an investigation. All right. So what's going on with this whole Hunter Biden story? I'm going to take a detour now, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about who Hunter Biden really was, because you need to know this in order to understand the rest of my story here. From everything that you have probably heard in the news, Hunter Biden sounds like he's some derelict kid who's a complete loser, that, whatever. Just so you know, Hunter Biden went to Georgetown University as an undergraduate, got a degree in history. Not an easy thing to do. Georgetown's one of our top universities. He has a law degree from Yale. Yale and Harvard, I shouldn't say this, but Yale, I'll put it this way. Yale and Harvard are among the very top law schools in the country. So you don't get a degree from either of those two universities without being top of the box. Okay, so first of all, the dude's smart. So what happened then? He did not want to go into politics, apparently. I mean, I have no inside information here. I'm just looking as a historian at the information I can find about him online. He did not appear to want to go into politics. So he went to work for MBNA, which was a sort of banking conglomerate in the 1990s. From there, he went on to become a lobbyist. He went out for his own and became a lobbyist. Okay, here's a problem, right? His dad is in the Senate and he is a lobbyist. They apparently had an arrangement where they didn't tell each other about what they were doing in terms of work. And, that might look iffy, but there's also that thing of like, wait a minute, should a kid not be able to do what he or she wants to do because of the profession that their parent is in? How do you work around that? And I promise you, he is not the only person in the world who has gone to work as a lobbyist with a member of Congress, with a family member who's a member of Congress. In fact, many members of Congress simply go on and become lobbyists themselves. There is, as they say, a revolving door between K Street and the Hill. So the reason I mention that is because he is an established businessman. And he's obviously a bright one. He's got a degree from Yale. And in 2006, George W. Bush appoints him to the board of the directors of Amtrak. All right, so this guy's not coming out of nowhere to be on a board. George W. Bush, who's a Republican, appoints him, the son of a Democratic senator, to be on the board of Amtrak for a 5-year term. He's not going to stay the whole term because for various reasons that doesn't really apply here. Then he went off while he was doing that, it wasn't a full-time job on the board. He became he formed his own investment firm as well. So again, he's managing money and investing and all that. Then in 2013, I'm sure you have heard about how he got kicked out of the Navy with a dishonorable discharge. Okay, that's not what happened at all. What happened is in 2013, okay, the guy was born in 1970. So 2013, he's 43 years old. He goes back to join the Naval Reserve, but he's too old to join the Naval Reserve. And so they have to do a waiver for him. And they do a waiver for him based on his age and based on the fact he has a previous drug incident. And so they give him this waiver because he wants to go back into the Navy in part of a program that lets a very few people who have desirable skills go ahead and serve in staff positions or receive commissions in the Navy. So he joins the Naval Reserve under this program when he's 43 years old. And the following month, when he has a routine urine test, he has cocaine in his urine. He is administratively discharged for that. So this is not, again, the way that you're hearing the story about him is not what really happened. And that's going to matter in just a minute. He also has been, since then, he's been very open about the fact he struggles with drug and alcohol addiction. And that's going to matter in just a minute as well as I spell out this story. But the man's a businessman. He's got a degree from Yale Law School. He seems to have a successful business. He is the son of a sitting U.S. senator. I'm sorry, a U.S. senator and former vice president who is now running to become president. He's actually a real person. So this image of him as this, I don't know, you kind of get the impression that they've dragged him out of a gutter, is simply not true. And the reason that that matters for what I'm talking about today with the Hunter Biden laptop thing is, again, is this a man who's going to leave 3 laptops with incriminating evidence on them in the middle of a repair shop and never come back for them? I'm a big no vote on that. All right, so what is happening with this laptop story right now, coming right now in late October before a presidential election? Let's go back to 2016. If you remember, the dominant story of 2016 was Hillary Clinton's emails. You know, there were all these, she used a private server, and there was this, and there was that, and, you know, and the story behind that, I guess I don't really have time to go into the Hillary Clinton story. If you are ever interested, let me know, because it's actually kind of interesting. But for our purposes today, I'm going to stick with the fact that that story became the defining feature of 2016. And if you remember, one of the key pieces of that was when then FBI Director James Comey went in front of television cameras and said that they had found more incriminating emails on Anthony Weiner's laptop. Anthony Weiner was married to an aide to Hillary Clinton, and that there were incriminating emails, and there was going to be an investigation of them. Now, that political scientists think that what really did the trick, turning people against Hillary Clinton and made her lose the Electoral College for that election. It was a really big deal. Now, what's important about that is it too was a non-story. You know, Clinton did what what Colin Powell had suggested to her. She created her own secret, secure server. And I will point out, it was never hacked when everybody else's was. And the investigations, the many investigations into those emails never came up with any wrongdoing, except to the degree that there have always been some slips with things like that, because people are human. So let me just play that one out a little bit. You probably never even noticed it, but about a year ago, just about now, about a year ago, the final investigation by the State Department into Hillary Clinton's emails was released. And it's very, very hard to find, even though it is a public document. Almost no splash. It came out on either late Friday night or early Saturday morning. I don't remember, but I did write about it. And I remember this because I read the thing and I was like, there's nothing here. I mean, the State Department says, yeah, well, there were some mistakes made in the way that there usually are. So, for example, that would mean somebody left papers in a room, secret papers in a room, and then left the door unlocked when he or she went to the bathroom, or left a window open, slips that human beings do. So I read this thing and I thought, there's really nothing here. And so I wrote a letter that night saying, the story's out and there was nothing there. And then the next day, like everywhere, there's all these stories about how many rules Clinton had broken and this and this and that. And you may remember it if you've been following me this long. I wrote this next post going, I must have made, I read this stuff. I thought I must have made a mistake. I must have read the thing wrong. And so I went back to the document, which you could only find at the time by going through Chuck Grassley's homepage, which frankly, that even for me, and I do this stuff, that's a really difficult way to find something like that. But I read it again and I was right. There really was nothing there. But the newspaper reports all kicked around the idea that there was something terrible in this. And the haunting of Hillary Clinton over those emails continues until even within the last month, once again, there was a group that really has kind of made its career by going after the Clintons, tried to get her to give a deposition. And ultimately, the court said no. This woman has testified for a gazillion hours and nobody's ever found anything. There's nothing more to be had. Go away. You're just harassing her. And yet, can't tell you how many emails I got from people going, this is it, she's going down, she has to testify again. And you will see there hasn't been any testimony because the court said you need to stop. All right, so why does this matter? Why does this matter? Is because the idea of announcing an investigation, not necessarily doing one, but announcing an investigation, is a form of disinformation, if you will, in the way that the media uses it, and the media amplifies it. So let me explain what that looks like. So if you remember back to September of last year, when we first learned about the Ukraine scandal, that is that Donald Trump asked Vladimir Zelensky, the new president of Ukraine, to announce an investigation into the Bidens before he would hand over the money that Ukraine needed to fight back against Russian incursions. And this became a huge deal. And one of the pieces that was clear to me from the very beginning is he didn't actually ask for an investigation. So if you read the media, they kept saying, you wanted an investigation, you wanted an investigation. No, he didn't want an investigation. He wanted an announcement of an investigation. Because once you have announced the investigation, the media, not simply the tabloids, but also the mainstream media, is going to pick up the fact that there's an investigation, and they're going to kick this idea around. And what you're going to do is you're going to take that fake news, if you will, that disinformation, and you're going to amplify it so that people come to believe it. And that's why I just made such a big deal about who Hunter Biden really is, because again, I suspect most of you did not realize that the man has a brain, has a job, has a drug problem or an alcohol problem or both, I don't know. But the idea that he is some guy that got dragged out of the gutter by his father is just wrong. But that's what you've heard, because it's been amplified back and forth so much by the good press as well as the crappy press, because they are discussing the story. So that's how you amplify a story. And you can see it here with the Hunter Biden laptop thing. I just described to you what that story says. And if you had just read that in the New York Post, you would have put it up there, right, with the alien has 3 babies with Elvis Presley story that's next to it. But because it became a story, and places like the Washington Post and the New York Times have to discuss that the story is out there, it gives it a life of its own. It makes it become real on its own. So what is the whole thing about Hunter Biden and Ukraine? The thing about that is that that in the midst of all of the fact that I don't have time to do all of Ukraine history, which I know a lot more about now than I did before Donald Trump's presidency, let me tell you. But so Ukraine has been trying to break away from when the communist government fell apart in the USSR. It was unclear what was going to happen and what was going to happen to the new democratic satellite countries that were breaking away from the control that the Communist Party had over them. One of those places was Ukraine. And it was, at first, it looked like the breakdown of the Soviet Union was going to create a lot of democratic governments in these satellite countries. And obviously, Vladimir Putin, who was a member of the KGB, the intelligence services under the old USSR, had very different ideas. And he managed to, and I'm not going to go into his history, Russian history right now. But he managed to turn that into an oligarchy. So rather than having democracy, you have basically Russia being run by an oligarchy right now. And I just have to put in here a nod to Paul Klebnikov, who was an American journalist who saw what was happening in Russia. He was the bureau chief for Forbes, I believe it was Forbes, in Moscow as this all was transpiring, and he tried to alert people back in America to what was happening out of real concern for what was happening. Once again, he was an American. He had a Russian last name, but he born and bred in America, had family ties to Russia, which is why he cared so much about it. But Putin murdered him. Putin had him murdered. And so when people sort of sit here and say, oh, it doesn't have anything to do with us, or even when they talk about Jamal Khashoggi, who was not an American citizen, he was an American national. I always want to bring up Paul because, yeah, we lost somebody early on in this game. And when you think of somebody like him and think of what he could have done had he lived, one of the voices that we lost, I think it's really important to remember people like Klebnikov. Anyway, so Ukraine was breaking away, becoming a democratic government that was a country that was allied with Europe primarily, allied with Europe, and Russia, the oligarchs in Russia did not want to let that go. Yet Ukraine is a very rich country in many ways, rich in terms of resources. I don't know about their finances, but rich in terms of resources, and they didn't want that to happen. So one of the things that happens is that they try and install into Ukraine basically a Russia-backed oligarch as the head of the Ukraine government. And one of the people who was instrumental in that is Paul Manafort. And again, I've talked about this forever and in many different ways, but this is how the Trump administration gets involved in Ukraine. So Paul Manafort helps this guy get onto into power in Ukraine, and he gets thrown out by the people in an uprising. And when shortly after that happens, Russia invades Ukraine. And it takes Crimea, and that's how Ukraine ends up in a war with Russia. But the problem, of course, is that Russia wants to control Ukraine. Europe also wants Ukraine to be allied with NATO, with Europe, and to be trading with Europe rather than be trading with Russia. And this is why Ukraine has become such an incredible hotspot. All right. So I hope you got that. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm still in the weeds here, but so that's what's going on when Trump comes into power. And one of the things about Manafort, of course, is that when his guy gets thrown out of power, he owes a bucket load of money to Russian oligarchs from whom he has borrowed money. And it is kind of a concern to a lot of us, me included, that he went on to work for the Trump campaign as the manager of the Trump campaign for no salary. And one of the first phone calls he makes, or first communications he makes, once he has accepted the position of being the campaign manager for Trump in 2016, is to somebody who has been an interface between him and the man to whom he owes so much money, and says, how can we make this right? So that suggests he had something to give once he was working for Trump. And also we know now, thanks to the Senate Intelligence Committee, that Manafort's Ukraine business partner is a Russian operative, according to the Senate Intelligence Committee. Now, interestingly enough, I wrote that the other day and somebody said, oh, Russia, you people on the left are crazy. Check your sources. That piece of information does not come from me sitting here on the coast of Maine. It comes from the Senate Intelligence Committee investigation. And they, of course, all have top secret clearances and know what they're talking about. So they had more than 1 million documents, and I forget how many people they interviewed, but they certainly have access to information that I do not. I would not know these people if I fell over them on the street. I know them only from these documents. All right. So that's where that stands. So where does Hunter Biden come into all this? Well, because Ukraine had been so rotten with oligarchs and they were trying to clean themselves up for foreign investment, because of that, what they tended to do was they tended to put on their boards Americans, people who had connections for sure, but also reputations as being kind of clean cut, because Americans did have that reputation then of being somewhat clean cut. And there were a number of boards that put people on them, Americans on them, to look like they were fine, upstanding companies. And there was money to be made in that. And again, my information about this comes from not Fiona Hill, oh my Lord, I'm drawing a blank on her. Marie Yovanovitch, who was our ambassador to Ukraine in the midst of all this. And she said this was a common practice. So it's not like the board of Burisma went and found Hunter Biden in a gutter and said, we can win favor here by putting him on a board. What it was simply an attempt to say, hey, well-connected guy, great credentials, we'll throw him on the board, throw money at him, and he'll make us look good just by having him on the board, which, by the way, is often what boards are all about. The people who sit on the board is really a way of lending your name to an organization. All right, so where does this go from here? So Burisma had problems with corruption in its past, and the Ukraine prosecutors turn over a lot. Actually, one of the things that they do to sort of harass their opponents is Ukraine prosecutors is to announce investigations. Enough said there. Anyway, all right. So what happens? So this now ties into the fact that while he was vice president, Joe Biden was instrumental in getting rid of a corrupt Ukraine prosecutor. That prosecutor was not investigating Burisma Holdings. There's no connection between those two. I mean, there certainly is between Burisma and Ukraine, and between Burisma and investigations, and between prosecutor. I mean, but in that case, they were not connected. The prosecutor was known to be corrupt. Everybody who was in favor of Ukraine joining forces with Europe and America wanted the guy out. It was including Ron Johnson, by the way, who now is such a vocal opposition of what's going on. He, in fact, was on this train as well. So this again is a made-up scandal. All right. So how does all this come into our lexicon in the last year? It comes into our lexicon because in 2016, it is established, and I'm going to explain to you how I get there, that the Russians interfered in the 2016 election in favor of Donald Trump. There's just no doubt of that. And under almost any other administration, really any administration, this would be considered a hostile act, possibly even an act of war, to go in and mess around with our elections. And if you are at all curious about this, speaking of sources, the place to go is to the Senate Intelligence Committee 5-volume report on the Russia investigation. And the reason I point you to that, and not the many other places you could read about that, is because the Senate Intelligence Committee is overseen by Republicans. So these are people who are going to be sympathetic to Trump's position on this, unlike the House Intelligence Report, which is going to be overseen by Adam Schiff, who's a Democrat from California. I will also remind you, of course, that Mueller is a Republican, Rod Rosenstein is a Republican. I mean, James Comey was a Republican. There's not some Democratic plot here, but I point you to those things because you can assume it's as sympathetic as it's going to get. And now you can literally Google these. You just Google Senate Intelligence Committee report, Russia, and there'll be 5 volumes. They're going to come up as a PDF, and you're going to look at them and you're going to go, oh, Richardson was nuts. I can't read this, because some of them are really quite long. Don't panic. If you look at it, there's a title page, and then there's like lots and lots and lots of pages of indexes. Skip them. You don't need to read them. They put indexes for government documents in the bow rather than the stern. I don't know why. Maybe to convince you not to read it. But after the index, each one of them has a very short, very readable summary. And when I say very short, I mean a page and a half, maybe 2.5 pages, in which they summarize the entire report. And it's easy to read. It's not in legalese. It is absolutely stuff that anybody who is watching me right now is going to be able to read. Now, there are 5 volumes, and I'm not going to remember off the top of my head which are the most important. 1 and 5 are key. 5 you absolutely should read. And then I think it's 1, 2, and 5. You can look and you can tell by the title, because 2 of them are kind of mechanical. Who were our sources? It's pretty clear that unless you're really into this, you don't want to read it. But the other 3 lay out the whole story. And this is where I'm taking my information from, along with the hearings, the impeachment hearings that gave us so much information from Fiona Hill and from Marie Yovanovitch and from Alexander Vindman and people like that. All right. So how does all this become involved? Russia helps Trump. Trump does not want to admit that Russia is helping him, either because he's embarrassed by it and he wants to believe he was elected on his own hook, or because he knew they were helping and he let them do it, which is illegal. So he has denied all along that Russia had anything to do with helping him. And we know that Russia helped him in 2 ways. It helped him, at least. It helped him first through disinformation, through amplifying Hillary Clinton's email stories and other stories as well, but that's the one that I'm talking about today. By making sure there was enough churn in the water that this story was there again and again and again and again. And the story that she was terribly ill because she stumbled one day, all the crap that was out there was by the amplification of Russian disinformation and by their reading of which I've talked about before, of political advertising. So they were able to, for example, depress Black turnout by emphasizing the concept of a super predator that they associated with Clinton and things like that. So they helped him in that way. They also helped him cybersecurity, and possibly with hacking as well. I'm not going to go into that right now, but so he doesn't want to admit that. He wants no part of that. And so he has maintained all along that Russia was not doing it. So one of the ways that that the Russian operatives who were in part of this started to push back was by saying it wasn't us, it was Ukraine. I mean, they're at war with Ukraine. So why not go, yeah, sure, it was Ukraine. There is zero, none, nada evidence, nothing that Ukraine interfered in the 2016 election or that it is doing so today. In fact, we have intelligence officer after intelligence officer saying, no, this did not happen. This is Russian disinformation that is trying to put us off the fact that the Russians were and are interfering in our elections from the 2016 to the present. This did not happen. All right, so then we've got Trump in trouble over trying to pressure Ukraine into opening this fake investigation. And one of the things that his people push really hard is the idea that no, it wasn't Russia that did it, it was Ukraine. And part of this whole idea that trying to pin the blame on Ukraine is also to bring in Hunter Biden and thereby Joe Biden. So this idea that there is this scandal and the Bidens are at the root of it is one of these disinformation campaigns. There is no there, if you will. So if you now step back to the present, and I hope that was all clear. I know it's so much stuff, but and by the way, I don't know why people bother with conspiracy theories when you can just do all this and it's all sourced. It's for me, it's fun. It's like living in a, I don't know, it's what I do for a living. I love it. Anyway, so once again, today, Trump is hammering again and again and again on the idea that Bill Barr, who, by the way, where has he gone, must open an investigation into Hunter Biden. And again, Trump knows there's nothing there. I mean, or if he doesn't, he's delusional. He knows there's nothing there. The point is not to lock him up or to do anything like that. The point is simply to make people think there's something there, to make people think that the Bidens are somehow corrupt. And how better to do that than to get your own government to step forward and say, yeah, that somebody here is corrupt. Now, Rudy Giuliani, of course, was instrumental in both the 2016 issue and the present issue, and he just really has no credibility. I mean, he's one of the guys he's been hanging out with is one of the Ukraine oligarchs who has been involved in this whole thing since the beginning. So you guys asked me about what was really going on with the laptop scandal. And again, it's one of those things, honestly, in 50, 100 years, if you were writing about this, it might get a sentence or no more. But it's really important because what it does is it talks about the media landscape in which we're living. The reality doesn't matter in many ways because so many people saw Hunter Biden laptops, and it became its own story. And that's one of the things that the Trump administration has been so phenomenal at doing is taking nothing and by throwing it out there, what they do is they sort of throw up a balloon and then the media has to report on it. So they bounce it back and forth. And pretty soon, unless you're paying really close attention, even if you don't really believe it, and I hope you'll be honest with yourself, you'll sit there and think, I didn't know that stuff about Hunter Biden, that he went to Yale Law School. And, because you're even if you don't think you're absorbing it, you are. The same way that when I wrote about Hillary Clinton's emails and said the State Department had exonerated her, then I read all these news people saying that there was this terrible scandal. I, who read the thing and am probably better trained to read government documents than almost anybody in this country. Even I saw all that fog out there and went, oh my God, I must have misread it, but I didn't. And that's what's going on with the Hunter Biden thing. And that's one of the reasons it is so crucial and why I do these videos. It is so crucial that we in America get our feet back under us. And we once again have a public discourse that is based in reality. Because, I mean, among other things, regardless of anything else I've just said about this whole scandal, Hunter Biden is a man who, I can't do the math, he's born in 1970, so what does that make him, 50 or something? He's a man who has is struggling with a drug and alcohol addiction and has gotten it under control. And that's something to be celebrated. And the fact that the media is being used in such a way that they are absolutely tormenting a man who has never wanted to be in the limelight just strikes me as being, frankly, immoral. And there are people who suggested that this is really a deliberate attempt to weaken Joe Biden by forcing his son to relapse. And I'm not going to go that far, but this is not who I want our country to be. So that whole idea of like people are complicated for sure, but let's find a way to stop using the media to create its own reality, which is really what has happened here. All right, so let me jump ahead here because there were other things that I absolutely wanted to go to and that you wanted to know as well. A quickie here. What do I think about after the Trump administration now or in 4 years trying Donald Trump for crimes versus a pardon? I have very strong feelings about this, why I pulled this up. I was actually young, but a supporter of the idea of Gerald Ford's to pardon Nixon because it was just such an ugly time and I just wanted it to be behind us. And that, I think, was one of the biggest mistakes in American history because what it did is it established the idea that some Americans are above the law. And I think had Richard Nixon been impeached, which of course he wasn't, the House Judiciary Committee impeached and passed articles of impeachment, the House would have, and then the Senate would have convicted. But of course we can't be sure of that because, it didn't happen. I mean, the history didn't go that direction. Even if he had not been found guilty, if there had been a trial, it would have signaled to future officials that they darn well better behave. And I think, and stay within the law. And I think if we had done that, we would not have had an Iran-Contra affair. We would not have had weapons of mass destruction. And Donald Trump would never have played with the idea of running for office because he would have known, as we all know, that there's real skeletons in his closet and he better stick close to home. So what is my impression? I think if in fact there is reason to indict Donald Trump, and mind you, I'm just a historian who is observing things. I'm not going to make a legal brief right now. I think there's a lot of stuff that needs to be investigated. Then yeah, absolutely, he should go through the same process that the rest of us do. Not so much because I think a 74-year-old man is going to reform and fly right, but because I think it's going to act as an example to other people. Similarly, though, I think that when you have established the precedent that some people don't have to answer to the law, what you are saying is that some people are above the law. And by definition, that means that not everybody is equal before the law. And I think in a weird way that the idea that the presidents and people who can buy their way out of legal situations don't have to answer to the law has reinforced the idea that poor people or people of color have to bear a larger burden of the law because we're not treating everybody equally. Clearly, we're not treating presidents the same way. So we don't really have to treat that 14-year-old brown kid the same way we treat the 27-year-old wealthy investment banker. And once you start, my thing on this, once you start accepting the premise that people are not equal before the law in this country, you have lost democracy. So I feel really, really strongly about equality before the law for all of us. And that's not even just about, it's really sort of philosophical. I think once you start to say, well, you don't really have to answer to the law, but you do, what you've said is that we're not all equal. Some people are better than others. And once you've said some people are better than others, you're no longer living in democracy. You're working towards some sort of rule by an elite over ordinary people. And I'm not behind that, philosophically or practically. All right. So, what do I have time for? Do I have time for Amy Barrett, court packing and originalism? No, I don't think so, which is unfortunate. I've written a lot about her, and I have spent actually the last 3 days on a really deep dive into originalism versus textualism. I did answer somebody about that today on the comments from last night's letter if you're interested. I would love to talk about that more in the future if anybody is so inclined. It's a really interesting topic. But I don't think I really have time for that here, because what you guys really want to hear about is the election and what's coming up. And perhaps I can fit in why Amy Coney Barrett matters in this. People have asked me repeatedly, what happens if Trump steals the election? And what happens if he doesn't agree to a peaceful transfer of power? I want to start with this, first of all. Where a lot of people are expending a lot of energy worrying about what Donald Trump is going to do. And that's really understandable. We're in a moment where we've got this off the rails president who does whatever comes to mind. And because he is, I'm not a psychologist, not a psychiatrist, but he certainly seems to me to have all the hallmarks of a narcissist, which really interests me as somebody who studies politics. What that says to me is that there isn't necessarily a rhyme or reason to what he's doing either. He is simply doing whatever looks best to him in that moment. So it's much harder to say, oh, he's going to do this, because it totally depends on the moment and the audience, because he's mercurial. He changes with whoever is around him. Hallmark of a narcissist, as I understand it, which I study, incidentally, because I think you kind of have to understand some of the hallmarks of egotism and narcissism and all that in order really to understand politics, which is how I got into it. And it's fascinating. Anyway, so you're all spending a lot of time worrying about what Donald Trump is going to do. And it's rather like, I understand, having an abuser in the household. That, everybody's sort of standing back going, what's going to happen next? Because we don't know. And because somebody once said to me, a family is defined by the craziest person in it. And right now, America is being defined by the craziest person in public in it. And that is the current day president. And I would say this, it is smart to watch and to worry, but it is also crippling to watch and to worry. And more interesting to me than what is Donald Trump going to do is, what are we going to do? Because once we, the people, say that we want something, we have ways to make it happen. So let me game out a little bit what things could look like. A lot of people have asked about stealing the election itself. Now, there's a bunch of ways to steal an election. One is voter suppression, and that's obviously going on. It's going on in a really big way. And this is one of the reasons that the Democrats keep saying vote in numbers too big to overturn. Because on a small level, for example, it appears that we have just had somebody throw a lit newspaper into an official voting box in California, I think it's a brown neighborhood, ruining a bunch of ballots. Those people whose ballots burned will never know it. Their vote will not be counted. That's wrong. But that's sort of on a little scale. We also have on the bigger scale where you have, for example, the problem of people get thrown off voting lists and don't know how that happened, and they show up to vote and they can't because they're not on a voting list. If that happens to you, by the way, you can almost always file a provisional ballot, which then will either be accepted or rejected depending on how it's evaluated. But most people don't know that, by the way. It's a huge problem. Even lots of poll workers don't know that, and it does depend on your states. But so there's the problem of getting thrown off voting rolls. There's also the problem of voter suppression through long lines. People in Georgia on the first day of in-person voting I stood in line for more than 9 hours. 9 hours. This is America. This is theoretically a democratic country. But what does that mean? It means that, what if you got a little kid? What if you're an elderly person who doesn't want to stand? What if you have to get to work? All these things that should not affect whether or not you have a say in society, but do affect your ability to stand in line for 9 hours. That's another way to suppress votes. Another way, for example, is on Indian reservations, for them not to put a voting place on an Indian reservation so that people have to bus 6 hours one way and bus 6 hours back to vote. Or that says you have to have a street address in order to vote. Another problem for indigenous people who live on a reservation because they don't have a street address. So there's been this big effort to actually get street addresses for indigenous people. Those are all voter suppression tactics. And someday, if we have time, I'll talk about ways to combat that, but in the future, not now. So there's ways to steal an election through voter suppression, and we've had this in America really dramatically, like after the Civil War, when African Americans in the South were there, and they had the right to vote, but none of them did, because it was as much as their lives were worth to even show up. But even if they did show up, there would be one reason or another why they wouldn't be able to cast a ballot. That's voter suppression. And Stacey Abrams, who ran for governor of Georgia and pretty clearly won the vote but lost the suppression, said we should stop thinking about red states. We should think about voter suppression states. And that's a good way to think about it, because in a free and fair vote, the Republicans would not be winning right now. In normal Republicans would. We're not in a normal Republican moment. And I hope I didn't make that sound bad. I study the Republican Party, and this moment is a really weird one for the Republicans. All right, so those are problems with actually getting people to the polls and getting their votes in. Now there's another problem that we've got going on right now, and that is the voting machines. So America votes on voting. A lot of states, the state I vote in and have voted in the past, don't use voting machines. I voted in Maine as a kid. Maybe they do now, but I vote in Massachusetts now, and we have paper, and you fill in the bubble, and it exists, and the machine counts it. You can watch it all happen. You can watch your little number go tick when it goes through. But a lot of states have voting machines that don't have a paper record, or even if they do have a paper record, that the machines can still be hacked, and this is a huge problem. It must be solved. There is no reason to think that our voting machines are secure, because they malfunction or they are hackable. That's not to say somebody has hacked them, but we do know that in 2016, a number of states voting walls were breached by cyber actors they expect they were from Russia. And in North Carolina, for example, there were some machines that just went haywire, and nobody ever did adequately explain why that happened. This needs to be fixed. We must get our machines fixed. And I think one of the things that I think is as a historian is interesting is that I suspect, having spent a little time playing around in cybersecurity, as an observer, not as a participant, I suspect once we know more about how one hacks how one hacks machines and how a hacked machine behaves, I suspect we're going to find that our elections have in fact been a bit tainted. Now, before you go screaming into the void, that's really not necessarily all that unusual. American elections have always had a little bit of fringe work around the edges, but that's definitely something to be concerned about. And one of the reasons that people are paying very close attention to what the polls look like nowadays and what we expect to have happen. And I will confess, it does concern me that Donald Trump is so adamant that he is going to win, because that's the same thing he said in 2016. And he obviously knew something that we did not, if you look at how that election played out. All right, so that's one way that one can steal an election. You've asked me about that, and it worries me. It does worry me. The numbers that seem to be piling up on the side of the Democratic nominee are large enough that it seems like they will provide a cushion, but who knows? This is definitely something to be concerned about. Now, the other way in which you could worry about this upcoming election and the stealing of this upcoming election, there's a couple ways. One of them is that it is pretty much understood that he's made it clear, he said so, that Trump is going to contest any close votes in any states that seem to be close. And there's probably 7 or 8 of them where it looks like it's going to be a squeaker at the end. And so they are, and Pennsylvania is one of them. It's a big fight last night over Pennsylvania, if you remember. So what they will do is the Trump campaign is going to do is they're going to contest the ballots in those states to try and get them thrown out so that they will be able to win. Now, is that going to work or not? That's unclear. I mean, one of the things I say, don't pay too much attention to what he's going to do. What are we going to do? Trump has lawyers on his team, but so do the Democrats. So does Biden. And as I've said, the names I know on the Biden list are crackerjack smart. Now, again, it depends who the judges are, right? And that's one of the things Trump has done. He's packed things with a lot of judges. And this is one of the reasons that it is so important for Trump to get Barrett, Amy Coney Barrett, on the Supreme Court is because he wants to be sure that he's got her in his corner. He's assuming, because you don't know how she's going to vote, he's got her in his corner when things like the ballots in Pennsylvania are challenged. So last night, the Supreme Court handed down a 4-4 decision, because Ruth Bader Ginsburg isn't there any longer, that permits the counting of Pennsylvania ballots for up to 3 days after the election. The Republicans wanted that thrown out. They didn't want mail-in ballots to be counted. And 4 of the so-called conservatives on the court, the originalists and the textualists, said that no, there's no way that Pennsylvania should count those. The assumption is if Amy Coney Barrett were on the court, she would have agreed with them, and Pennsylvania would not have been able to count ballots that came in after November 3rd. And I could explain to you why that's the case, but let me just go on here. So what happens if Trump manages to muddy the waters enough in that period immediately after the election? He is hoping, and what he is trying to do is to throw the election into the House of Representatives. And the way that plays out is this. The 12th Amendment to the Constitution provides for the House of Representatives, with each state getting 1 vote, to go ahead and decide an election. And he wants to do that because there are more Republican states right now than there are Democratic states. So if you threw it into the House of Representatives, he believes he would win because, Nebraska, if it's a 1-1, Nebraska has just as much clout as California and New York. So he's hoping that that's going to happen. Now, one of the things I want to remind you of here is this is not okay. And again, I'm stepping back here as a person who studies democracy. He's making no pretense of actually trying to win a majority of voters. What he's trying to do is game the system so he gets installed even if he loses by a significant margin. That is not sustainable for a democracy. And I don't see Americans putting up with it. I truly don't. And I'm going to tell you where this goes from here. You can talk all you want about, he's going to steal this election. What does that look like? What does that look like when Nebraska, and I don't mean to pick on Nebraska, we could make it Maine, although of course I think Maine should decide everything. When Maine chooses who's going to be president over New York and California, who says, oh yeah, that's fine for the next 4 years? Nobody. Nobody says that's fine. And that's when we have a real small d democratic crisis. But before you get worried about that, mind you, all these things could transpire, but I'm just saying, hold your fire here, because before you can get worried about that, the people who are going to decide on from the House of Representatives, if that even happens, which it may not, and I'll explain that in a minute. The people who are going to decide on that are the ones who are elected in this election. And a number of states are within 1 or 2 people of switching from being Republican delegations to being Democratic delegations. So this is where House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic National Committee are really putting their weight right now to go ahead and to make sure those Republican state delegations become Democratic state delegations, because then the whole point is moot. All right, so that's in it. That's what's happening. That's what he's trying to do. He's trying to get it to the House of Representatives. He's trying to throw it into the courts, where he's hoping that he has stacked the courts enough that they're going to put him in. He's hoping that he can continue to preside over the country, even though he's wildly unpopular. And I'm saying that seems to me unlikely to be something that Americans are going to stomach. And here's the next piece that I don't think anybody's talking about. Let's take a look at how that works, what that looks like. In order for Trump to pull off this kind of coup, if you will, he's got to have the support of his voters, of course, his base, and they do support him. Man, they want him in there. But he also needs the support of business. He needs the support of wealthy people. And some people certainly do support him. But here's some problems with that. Trump doesn't pay his legal bills. I don't want to use that word. He has gone through $1 billion in this campaign on limousines, on Super Bowl ads, on all kinds of sort of wealthy baubles. And he has not spent the money trying to get elected, which, his choice, I suppose. But remember, that's campaign funds. So that's people who put money into his campaign and watched it drive around in Brad Parscale's fancy car, or watched it get funneled back through to Lara Trump, for example, who technically worked for Parscale, but was pulling down, I guess, maybe still, I don't know, $15,000 a month. Well, how much money are you willing to throw into that? First of all. And second of all, he needs that money now to fight these legal battles. And right now, I don't know if you saw the news today, and I won't write about it, it's not important enough, but if you remember, he sued Amoroso, is that her name? Something like that. She wrote a tell-all book, and he accused her of breaking her non-disclosure agreement, and he sued her, and they made a big deal about it all. He hasn't paid his bills in that. It's about to go dormant because his lawyers are like, dude, pay up. And he doesn't have the money to pay. So how many people are going to be throwing money into this with money are going to be throwing money into this legal system? And how many people truly want him to be there any longer? And let me unpack that a little bit. What's in it for you if you're a wealthy American? And I mean really wealthy, or even, wealthy for everybody who's watching me and, us here. You want the courts to decide your way. Well, you got that. Even if Coney Barrett doesn't get in, basically, you've got a pretty conservative court there. So you've already gotten everything you're going to get out of this guy. You're never going to get anybody else by him. So you're not waiting on that. But here's another thing. One of the things that is really problematic for people who are trying to run the country with money is they need a level playing field. They need there actually to be laws, because if you don't have laws, you don't know what to invest in, because you don't, if Trump is tweeting who's favored for the day and who's not, and he's helping out some businesses and not others, you can't invest, you can't start a new business, you can't do anything, because it's not a question of who's good or who's smart or who's whatever. It's just a question of who's on his team this week. And somebody wrote and asked me about the history of Securities and Exchange Commission in America and why the stock market is so crazy. And I won't talk about the stock market, but Securities and Exchange Commission comes out of the New Deal. But if you think about it, the people who were hurting in the New Deal, they weren't asking for the Securities and Exchange Commission and the series of laws that are leveling the playing field at stock exchange. That's businessmen who are saying, we don't want the kind of volatility that we had in the 1920s, where the head of the stock exchange was a crook and just picking winners and losers. We're certainly happy to have a playing field that benefits all of us, but we can't have this one that is so idiosyncratic, because we can't function this way. So think about what it looks like if you have a lot of money. You might not be a Democrat, but you don't want Trump to stay in power because he's all over the map. At the same time, just recently, two major banking/investment firms, and off the top of my head, I can't remember which they were, I wrote about them, came out and said, we're backing Biden. His plans just look better than Trump's. And one of the big pieces of that, of course, is that the financial cost of coronavirus has been astronomical. And simply getting it under control, as every other advanced country has done, would have made a lot of money. And as it is, we've just taken such a huge hit. I think that there is real reason to suspect that support for Trump among moneyed people, truly moneyed people, is a lot softer. At least historically, it looks like it should be softer than people are giving that credit for. All right, so the takeaway here is that we're in a volatile period, of course, but people have asked what they can do. And the answer to that is there's 2 weeks left in this election. Continue to do what you're doing, but do remember your state legislatures. People don't pay enough attention to their state legislatures. Those legislatures now have become incredibly important. First of all, I'm sorry, your state legislatures, also your state representatives is what I meant to start with. Your state representatives. Because a lot of people don't pay a lot of attention to their state representatives. We're busy worrying about senators and presidents and the Supreme Court and all that. If your state is one of those states that's on the cusp, and you care about it being Republican or Democratic, now's the time to put your weight on that scale and to start phone banking and writing and doing everything you can to support the chances of whatever your local representative are. So that's a good place to put energy. And the other place, of course, is in the state legislatures. And the reason that matters, and it matters hugely, is because of the census, which I did not talk about today, but I will try to soon. And that is that with the census, each state is going to redistrict the state for the next decade. And the Republicans were very effective in 2010, taking over state legislatures to gerrymander them to the point that Democrats could not get elected. And that's a much longer story there. But this is going to happen again. Who controls state legislatures is going to say a lot about the direction of the country going forward. So if you're looking for something to do for the next 2 weeks, it's going to take your mind off of other concerns you might have. You really can make a difference, not only at the national level, but also at the state level. And now is the time to do that. So I see I've run out of time. I've even run over today, which I try not to do. But I would urge you not to despair if you're feeling that way, and instead to look at the fact that in the space of 4 years, Americans have gone from thinking of democracy as a spectator sport to stepping in and caring and deciding that they're going to do something about that. And is it a problem now that Trump has packed the courts and that he is threatening to not to leave quietly, all those things? Yeah. But at the end of the day, when you think about Trump, think about the fact that in addition to simply being a narcissist, he's also pretty lazy, and he doesn't like to put a lot of effort into things. And I don't think it's a stretch to think that after all of this, if there is a big enough turnout against him, he might not make as much of a splash as people are afraid that he will. All right, thank you for being here, and I will see you Thursday. Until then, keep the faith, everybody.